Although it sounds liberating, what most people don't know is that do what you want is actually the golden rule of Satanism. Developed by Aleister Crowley and often referred to as the Law of Thelema, it says, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." Remember what Satan told Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. He told them that God, with his strict rules about right and wrong, was a tyrant and an oppressor, and if they broke free from him and went their own way, they could establish their own moral code. They could live however they wanted. They could become their own gods. And he did it by trying to suggest loopholes, by blurring lines and creating grey areas in God's strict instruction. Did God really say, is how he begins the temptation in Genesis 3:1, "You will be like God," is the clincher. Satan tried to paint the rejection of God and the abandonment of his moral law as liberty. Adam and Eve were completely sold in this, and many people today are too. And in fact, it leaves all of us with a decision to make. In effect, there are now two paths before each of us in this life. There is God's path, where we look to him as an objective reference point of good, and as we know him better, we understand evil better too. Or there is Satan's path. This is where we completely reject God. We reject absolute good and follow our own path instead. We can then formulate our own ideas about morality, make up our own rules, do whatever we want, define our own standards of right and wrong, place ourselves on the throne of our own lives. We can become our own gods. Again, the first path is God's path, and the second path is Satan's. There is no third option in this life. And the shocking thing is that most people in the world today are following Satan's path without even realizing.
Ben, my name's Chad. So Ben, you don't believe in right and wrong?
Nope.
And why is that?
It's purely subjective. I mean, it's never really straight up and down, if that makes any sense. That's kind of the best way I can explain it.
So when you think of something like torturing babies for the fun of it, you can't say that's black and white wrong. You say that it's open?
I say it's cruel. But I mean, like, torturing babies for the fun of it, you should be stopped. I don't believe in right or wrong, but I would stop you if I saw you doing it. Okay. I don't think you'd go to hell if you did it, though, because, I mean, even if you did go to hell, you can find heaven in hell.
When you use a word like should or ought, are you not assuming that there's a certain way that things should or ought to be?
In my own personal ideals, I have an ideal world, but I believe that other people disagree with me about what my ideal world is, and they could be just as right as I am. I think you could be just as right as I am.
So you think that each individual person has their own truth value, and it's equivalent to one another? I have my opinion, you have your opinion, and neither one of us has any more truth value than the other?
Essentially.
Just yes or no?
Yes.
So your truth value, your opinion, has no more weight or bearing than a child molester or a rapist?
They still believe what they believe, you know?
Is he moral?
Is he moral?
Yeah.
Well, moral is also subjective.
That's true.
It's perfectly okay for some people in certain parts of the world to eat other people. That's part of their culture.
What do you think? Do you think it's morally wrong to fornicate?
Wrong to do that?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so at all.
What about stealing and lying? Is that wrong?
No, I don't.
So lying and stealing's okay, adultery's okay, and fornication's okay.
It depends. Like, it really depends on the circumstances, because if you're doing like a little white lie to like not hurt someone, I don't want to like.
What about little white thefts? You can steal white things?
No, I don't want to have my words misinterpreted, but I don't think stealing's okay, or like lying in a way that.
What about rape? Is that okay?
No.
So where do you get your rules from? You've said adultery's okay, lying's okay, stealing's not okay, and what about rape? That's not okay. So where do these rules come from? Do you just make them up?
No, it's just kind of what I picked up on the world, I guess, with just my own
experiencing life. We have formed our own wrongs and rights, I guess.
So what do you think of a man who says, I think rape is okay, it's right? What would you say to him? You've got to say, oh, that's okay, because you just make it up as you go along.
I would question him why he thinks that way, because I like to hear everyone's answer.
He says it gives him pleasure. That's what life's about.
Well, if the other person isn't, like, if they don't have his consent, then that's wrong.
Why is it wrong? I'm trying to pin you down because you've got no basis for right and wrong. Adultery's right, fornication's right, lying's right, and so there's no basis to say rape is wrong unless you believe in God.
You see what was happening there? Those people rejected God, and so morality became completely subjective for them. It could be whatever they wanted it to be. And so their minds have become confused as to what good and evil actually is. Without an objective reference point, they've started inventing their own moral code and following their own hearts, and that has inevitably led them into sin. They've chosen to bend the moral law, to twist it, and to create grey areas to suit themselves. They're now living in a moral darkness, but they've become so used to that darkness that they don't recognize just how dark it is. They're literally standing there saying that in some cases it's okay to torture babies, to eat people, to lie, steal, and commit adultery. Their consciences are clearly poking at them and telling them that there are indeed absolute rights and wrongs, but because they want to be free to do whatever they want, you can almost visibly see them trying to subdue that inner voice. You see, people often imagine that Satanism is stripping naked and dancing around cauldrons and killing chickens. But Satanism is actually much more mundane than that. Satanism is just the worship of self. It's the deification of self. It's saying, I will make my own rules. I will do what makes me happy. The Bible says that when we believe there's no God, we become prone to hedonism. We think, life's too short not to do the things that make me happy, so let's feast and drink, for tomorrow we die. The highest holy day in Satanism is actually one's own birthday, because it represents the birth of their own God. What's actually happening here is their own sinful nature is beginning to enslave them. This is why Paul sets the two paths in front of us by saying, you can be slave to sin, which leads to death, or you can choose to obey God, which leads to righteous living. You see, if you follow Satan's path, you'll not only decline morally as the people in those interviews, but you'll eventually find yourself in Satan's destination. You're headed for death. But if you follow God's path, you'll learn how to live righteously and you'll gain everlasting life.
Isn't there something within you that just says raping and child molesting isn't only subjectively wrong, it's not just wrong because that's my opinion, but it's absolutely wrong. But with my worldview, I just can't explain that somehow. Is that sort of the conundrum that you're in?
Something along those lines.
That's what happens when you give up belief in God, when you suppress the truth.